Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Nice to see you. It is my honor to welcome Rabbi Michael Strassfeld here to IKAR, along with your wife, Rabbi Joy Levitt. And we are so fortunate and delighted to welcome you and to be in conversation with you. I know Rabbi Rouse so wishes that she could be here and be part of this conversation. I know that her relationship with the two of you goes way back. And so I am the fortunate recipient of her one Shabbos off in however many years it's been since that's happened, and get to be in conversation with you, but I know she wishes she could be here and sends her love. So, Rabbi Strassfeld is here in part to talk about this wonderful new book that he wrote, Judaism Disrupted, a spiritual manifesto for the 21st century. But I have to say to you, Rabbi, that many people, as you probably know, are familiar with your work already, even if they haven't read this new book, because they are familiar with the Jewish catalog. And that response tells you enough, and I should share with you. I mean, someone even came up to me today and said, I raised my family on the Jewish catalog, right? So I really want to start by thanking you for your voice. I don't mean that as a pun. Rabbi Strassfeld lost his voice. So we're going to fight through that today. But really, I mean it, for finding the Torah within and for sharing it with the people and for empowering each and every one of us to find the Torah within, whether we have a formal title or not, formal training or not, and to make Judaism our own and to take it seriously and to explore what gifts it has to offer us. Now, one of my favorite parts about this book is that you did what I sort of want all authors to do, which is to tell their story as part of the book, because it gives insight into the reader. Who is this who's writing, and how did this person arrive at the perspective that they have arrived at? And in this book, you told a little bit of your story. And so rather than read a bio, I want to ask you to share a little bit of your story, and maybe in part you can include in that journey the journey itself from the catalog to Judaism Disrupted, right? What has shifted for you? What has shifted in the broader American Jewish landscape that requires this manifesto that the catalog perhaps doesn't address in the present moment? So that was multi-parts. Your story and the journey from the catalog to Judaism Disrupted.
This has never happened to me. So I feel badly for you because you have to listen to this voice. All right. Right on the mic, right? Okay. I'm just imagining in some moment it's just going to go back to normal. Oh, it's getting closer, but all right. So thank you for coming in, and hopefully you won't feel forced to leave, but enough excuses. So as you said, as the subtitle of the first catalog is a do-it-yourself kit, and in a way that really summarizes what the catalog was about. And if you, even better. Ooh, that's right. Okay. Right, so it summarizes what the catalog was about, and it came out of the Jewish counterculture, which was kind of parallel to the general counterculture of the 60s and the 70s, which there was a lot of do-it-yourself. There was a lot of crafts, like make your own things rather than go to a store and buy them, and that was reflected in the catalog itself. Many people have said, it was the challah recipe, that's maybe the most popular thing, at least from what people have said. And someone said something interesting to me, and maybe the last day or two when I've been speaking about the book, was that, like, they didn't, sort of before that, people didn't understand that, you could make your own challah. Like, you didn't have to go to the store and buy it, right? And that was part of the larger thing. But it wasn't just like, make your own talit, tie the tzitzit, the fringes, but the broader attitude that we were really trying to say that, and reflecting our own experience in the Jewish counterculture, in the Chavurah, this small intentional community that I was a part of and others were a part of, that we really believed in doing Judaism, not having the rabbis, cantors, do it for you, but that everyone needed to participate. And the book was really about talking about our own Judaism, our own experience, and trying to make that accessible to people. You may remember, some of you may remember the Whole Earth catalog, which was in some ways the model for the Jewish catalog. That was an even larger paperback, along with other paperbacks of that time, Our Bodies, Ourselves, all part of the same kind of phenomenon. Yeah, was that the Nearings from? Yeah. So there were all those variations on that, and and in the end, we decided not to call the book the Jewish Whole Earth Catalog, which we thought about, because the difference was, if you remember the Whole Earth Catalog, like if you wanted to build a geodesic dome, which was a big thing for 5 minutes in those days, the Whole Earth Catalog said, had a big page from the book by Buckminster Fuller about geodesic domes, and you could buy the book, the information, etc. And we realized that when it came to much in Jewish life, we couldn't say, go get this book, right? It would have been, you want to build a sukkah, the booth for Sukkot? Go to Shulchan Aruch, that's the code of Jewish law, which is all in Hebrew, and it's like you really have to know what's going on to understand what's going on. And it actually doesn't tell you how to build it, it only tells you, how many walls do you need to have, or they can't be under a tree, or this much of a tree, right? So,
and it's in cubits.
Yeah. And it's right. The worst thing was its cubits, So, so we realized the book had to be the resource itself. We couldn't send people other places, and in that sense, so then we just decided to call it the Jewish Catalog, we were really, and the people we asked were all people we knew. Almost everybody that wrote for the catalog was in their 20s and 30s. There were a few exceptions. And I think part of the charm of the book was that we didn't think of ourselves as writers and, this was going to be a big bestseller or any of that. So we were naive, and I think that was good in a way. And and the book was joyous, and the book was, very contemporary in its look. There was marginalia, which we decided we wanted to sort of, in some ways, like copying what a page of Talmud looks like. But it also had, photographs, and the photographs weren't just of Hasidim, who obviously looked Jewish, but there were people who, looked like every other young American with really long hair. If you have the catalog, you can check. My picture on the back, I haven't changed a bit in 50 years, and your eyesight has. So, and I think it gave expression to a form of Judaism that was bubbling. I believe that if the catalog had never existed, most of the things the changes that it expressed would have happened, maybe slower, maybe not all of them, but the move to a more participatory Judaism, a move to a more informal style in services, changing the music of services from performative to participatory. All those things were beginning to happen, perhaps, but the catalog came and gave expression to it, and importantly said that you could be in contemporary and Jewish in America, and you didn't have to choose between the two. And it was an enormous success. The first catalog, and the second and third were. We realized after the first catalog came out, we actually, if you look in the first catalog, we put our home addresses in the. So we got all this mail. Most of it was very nice, and one person wrote, said, "Well, none of you have any children because there's nothing about children in the first Jewish catalog." And we said, "No." And then, "Well, no, yes, we don't have any children." So the second and third became not revised, but what was missing, and then we tried to be complete, and so it became two volumes instead of just one. Oh, right, my story. That's like.
That's right. I only asked you a 5-part, complicated existential question to kick off the interview.
So my story and how that correlates with the catalog really is. I grew up in a modern Orthodox home in Boston. We lived in the old Jewish neighborhood of Mattapan, Dorchester. I tell people from New York that it's like the Grand Concourse, but it has to be like Fairfax, maybe. But everybody, almost every single person in the whole neighborhood was Jewish. Most of them didn't go to the dozen, synagogues that existed in the neighborhood. My father was an Orthodox rabbi in one of the synagogues. And now, at that time, it wasn't so unusual for modern Orthodox Jews to be liberal politically. And so we were, and my father marched with Dr. King in Selma. And I went to a Hebrew day school, Maimonides, that still exists in Boston. And that extensive Jewish education has been a blessing to me in the sense that I have the access to tradition that most people, and certainly most liberal Jews, don't have. And in some ways, or not in some ways. And in a way, the basic story of my life is that I'm constantly trying to make the richness and the wisdom of the Jewish tradition accessible to people that don't have that background. Boy, I really don't sound like myself. I know, it's okay.
I'm prepared to articulate whatever he can't say because I know all of this.
She's been accompanying me, so she. So that was the world I grew up in, and then in college I began to move away from Orthodoxy, mostly because I no longer accepted some of the basic beliefs and tenets that underlay Orthodoxy. And after college, here's where the two things intersect. I joined Chavarat Shalom, an intentional community near Boston. It was actually in Somerville, and it was a very important model for Jewish life, that we were really interested in the Jewish tradition and the Jewish past, and yet we were very involved in the contemporary, and it was eclectic. We like to say that we took an emphasis, commitment to social justice from Reform Judaism, a commitment to a kind of scientific study of Jewish text from a conservative, a commitment to practice from Orthodoxy, and I'll say more about this probably later. And Hasidism was a very important piece of the Chavurah experience, in part because both Zalman Schachter Shalomi and Art Green were founders of Chavarat Shalom. So if those names mean something to you. So that sort of shaped my identity. And as I said, the catalog really came out of the Chavurah, and we asked all the people in the Chavurah and the people in the Chavurah in New York and in Farbrengen in Washington. There was a small circle, and we asked everybody to participate in writing the catalog. Some people came through, some people didn't, but and then it came out, and then my story from there, just not to make this too long, at some point left the Chavurah, moved to New York City, was involved in a variety of independent minyanim on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and Anshe Chesed, which became a coalition of these minyanim, and another two pieces that happened a little bit later was I also co-led with Debbie Friedman, the songwriter and musician of blessed memory. We did a once-a-month healing service for 9 years, and I was also on the founding faculty of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. If you know what that is, good, and if not, you can Google it or something at some point. But spirituality became a part. So I'll finish this answer in a second. So that when it was coming to the 25th anniversary of the Jewish Catalog's publication, I asked myself, maybe I should do a new catalog, not so much an updated, but okay, the catalog spoke to its time in 1973. What would be the equivalent needs spirit of the time, 25 years later or so. And it felt to me that spirituality, which wasn't a word used so much 25 years earlier, had become an important part of the American landscape. And like everything else, if it's part of the American landscape, then it usually has some impact on the Jewish landscape. And so I wrote a book called A Book of Life, Embracing Judaism as a Spiritual Practice. And that's reflected in the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. So you want me to come to the moment, or you want to ask?
Well, I think you brought us right up to the moment, and I really appreciate what you just said, because you named explicitly that the Jewish catalog emerges as from an assessment that the current Jewish landscape, the institutions that are supporting Jewish life, the normative practice of Jewish life, is out of step, or it's out of sync in a certain sense, with the very real needs of the everyday Jewish person who is failing to step into the fullness of their Judaism because the gap is widened between what is available to them, the message that's offered to them, and what is resonant in their own lives and in the broader cultural milieu. And it seems that once again, in writing this book, you are taking a 10,000-foot view of American Jewish community in particular and asking a similar question, right? In what ways is the everyday experience of a Jewish person, their needs, the questions that they're asking, the messages that ignite their passion, and so forth, in what ways is the Jewish community offering containers and rituals and framework and language to animate those passions? And in what ways is, once again, the gap widened? And then that question leaves you, right, with really this manifesto for a new understanding of Judaism, a new approach to Judaism. And so I'm hoping that you can say a little bit about the diagnosis, right? As you're looking at the American Jewish community, what are you diagnosing as being out of step with what the everyday Jewish person needs and wants? And then, of course, what are some of the medicines that we can take?
Good. Including one for my throat. No, I think that's perfect, right? And that's what I'm saying in a way, like maybe I said this already, I can't remember. It's been so long since we started. I keep on trying to write the same book again, but it's always different, and I'm different, and the world is different. Right. So if the catalog was a how-to, I think the real question now is why. Like, why be Jewish? I almost called the book Judaism, Why Bother? Because I figured if someone walking by in a bookstore, then realize people don't walk by bookstores anymore, walking by would say, oh, let me take a look at that book. But I didn't this reason that you're just like, ooh, like it's not my style. But I think that's, in other words, on that level, the access to the how-to is there, right? And and people have said, well, why don't you do an updated version of the catalog? I said, well, you can get all the information on Google. I mean, half of it's wrong, and another half is. No, and some more of it's biased, but it's there, so you don't need that really anymore. But I think it's really the question of why. So I'll share a story that happened after the book came out. Joy and I were invited to a gallery in Soho, in New York, in Manhattan, and there was a panel of Jewish artists. Oh, yes. Oh, right. Lisa Edelstein? Yeah. So two of them were... And Lisa had the exhibit, right? Yeah. So she had the exhibit that was in this gallery, which was smaller than half the size of this room, but and filled with young people, young Jews, except for Joy and I, and the artists were. Lisa wasn't one of the artists that said this, but I would say they had like a half a dozen people on the panel, and they were introducing themselves, talking about their art, and one person did that and said, "Well, I guess you could call me a good Jew," and then the next person said, "Here's my art, and I guess you can call me a mediocre Jew," and then the gallery owner, who was also Jewish, of course, said, "Well, I guess you can call me a bad Jew," And Joy actually really said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And it became clear that what they understood was that good Jews go to synagogue and observe Jewish rituals, and they didn't do any of those things, and they didn't know how to, or they weren't interested, or both. And they thought, well, that's the world of good Jews, and we live kind of in a different world. And it seemed to me that was a category mistake that was a huge part of the problem, right? That what it means to be Jewish in lots of people's minds is to do what I call the Jewishly Jewish things. That is, the things that only Jews do, like keep kosher or fast on Yom Kippur. Right, and what it means to be a good Jew is to do a lot of those things, and what it means to be a bad Jew is to do very few of those things. And the key point I'm trying to make in the book is that the purpose of Judaism isn't to be a good Jew. The purpose of Judaism is to take the wisdom and practices of the Jewish tradition and with that, take the most precious gift that each of us has been given, which is our life, and try and live it with meaning and purpose. So in some ways, I think Judaism, so my diagnosis is, and even though I'm basically an optimist in general, though it's becoming harder these days, even before these days, like even before COVID, I was concerned about the future of liberal Judaism. I'm talking about liberal Judaism broadly, and not so much the Orthodoxy, because I think it's different, and I think there's a different set of challenges there, perhaps. And it's not the world that I live in any real way. I think I don't have to tell you, you're at IKAR, one of the places that is modeling new things and is thriving, and you're not the only place in the Jewish landscape, but there's not so many, and there's mostly, if you looked at the general statistics and pictures, things are in decline. Fewer people are affiliated with synagogues, and part of that is what's going on in religion in the world and in America as well. It's again we're different, but mostly we are in this larger picture of where religion is often seen, in fact, as a negative thing these days, and I think so. I think even if it's negative, I think for these artists who were Jewish artists, right? They weren't artists who just happened to be born Jewish, but in their work, they saw themselves. So these are not people standing completely outside, right? But they didn't think what was inside was for them. And I think it comes down to some sense that Judaism is mostly about these rituals, and don't make sense, or what does it have to do with anything that's important, or it's like nostalgia, and so the book is really about saying, no, there's actually immense richness in the tradition, and that's why it's not only for the bad Jews. I think it's also for you, the good Jews. For people who are in the community, not just for the people who stand, basically outside, because I think the challenge for all of us is to convey, and to convey that by the way we live our lives, that there's really a lot of meaning and purpose here. And my hope is that when that gets conveyed, when people experience meaning and purpose, then they'll say, oh, yeah, like I want to do that. I want to participate in that. I want to, there's some wisdom about my, how to think about my inner qualities and the things that each of us struggles with, whether it's whatever it is, whether it's particular to, generosity or anger or patience, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the book. And one lesson.
It seems to me that part of the project of the book is to debunk some of the accepted assumptions that's made its way into the everyday vocabulary of Jews speaking to each other, to the point that they'll say good Jew, bad Jew, and they even know what they mean when they say that. They know when they're saying that they're making a comment about particular observances, about kashrut, about Shabbat. And part of the project of the book is to debunk the assumption that the pinnacle of Jewish life is fulfilling particular obligations, and to, in some ways, almost rewind the evolution of Jewish practice, of relationship with Judaism, and say, well, wait a second. If we were to look at the texts that we have, if we look at the accrued wisdom of our tradition, and we wanted to reassert what is of ultimate value, where might we land? We might not land on questions of how much matzah to eat on Pesach is of tantamount importance. We might land on other questions that actually ought to drive the religiosity and spirituality of our lives. And it's not, as I understand it, it's not a project of throwing it all out and starting all over again. You define your approach as radical traditionalism.
You read the book.
I read the book. So I
thought he just saw the movie.
I'm waiting for the movie.
I'm waiting for the movie.
So I think it would be helpful to hear, right, what is radical traditionalism, and what does it mean to articulate a Judaism that is organized around different organizing principles than what has been the dominant organizing principle that creates the construct of good Jew, bad Jew, such as obligation and law and commandedness. You are taking us back to the sources to put forward a new organizing principle defined as radical traditionalism. So tell us more about what that means.
Good questions. Look, I mean, in some ways, the starting point is that, and I would think probably most of you already feel this, that halakha, which is kind of central for rabbinic Judaism as law, is really not how most liberal Jews look at it, right? It's because partly because I would, again, I don't know all of you, but I think most liberal Jews don't think there's a God, assuming they believe in a God, there's a God who said, okay, here's 613 commandments, and you better do them because otherwise you're going to be punished. And so if you eat lobster, you will be punished, right? Or if you steal, you'll be punished. Okay, that one we might agree with. But so I don't think that's a useful way to think of what Judaism is. And I mean, I'm glad you said something about the how much matzah to eat, because I don't know this because we don't have the minutes of the rabbis and the Talmud. When they make these decisions, the Talmud's definitely not the minutes, but they decided, Rabbinic Judaism decided that the key element of the system of commandments is fulfillment. So, and then they went and say, okay, well, what do you have to do to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles? How long do they have to burn? Which way do you do it this way? You do it that way? All the stuff that was developed to answer the question, I want to know how to do this so that I can check it off as I did it right, correctly. What I believe, this is my own theory, what I believe is they decided, therefore, they couldn't say, and while you're doing it, lighting the candles this way, you have to have the right kavanah. You have to have the right intention. So if what you're thinking about is what presents you're getting for Hanukkah, you have to light the candles again, right? And, it's like take number 59, Hanukkah candle lighting, and because that would have been hard. So they chose fulfillment. And I think, and in some ways, even though Hasidism, which is very important for me, as I mentioned, doesn't say, oh, you don't have to fulfill the commandments, but Hasidism emphasizes kavanah, intention. It's all about intention. And I think that's basic for me, right? So it's about intention. Like, who cares how much matzah you eat, right? Either you want to do it or you don't want to do it. Or you hate the taste of matzah, so you just eat a little bit, right? But why am I telling you have to eat, 3 pieces of matzah, or 2 pieces of matzah? I don't know if you've seen these. You can buy, like, the thing so you can put the matzah on this sheet and measure it, make sure you're doing it right? You can get those from bookstores, So why is that even a question, right? It's either you want to do it and you do it, or you really don't want to do it. So either don't do it or do it reluctantly. But it's all about, and that's why I say, so one of it is intention. But I want to say, it isn't just, I feel like observing Shabbat this week, that I'll do it, next 3 weeks, not so much, right? So it's, I talk about Judaism or halakha as a practice. And like any practice, you have to do it regularly, right? The line I like to use, you will never learn to play piano if you only practice 3 times a year. You just won't. It just will never, not in 50 years, it won't happen, right? So who's making you do this? You are, right? God's not going to strike you down if it's because you find it meaningful, because you want to do it. So it's a complete shift of what the paradigm is. And I think intention, which I want to say is, tradition talks about kavanah, intention. But I also want to use a word from contemporary spirituality, which is awareness. I think it's the same thing, right? So what these rituals are is to make us more aware of our lives, make us more aware of the things that are holding us back from what we could be, or the things that get in the way. So here's an example of a small practice, and taking a ritual that I think many Jews not some obscure one that only 12 Jews do, but like many Jews do, which is the mezuzah. I think most Jews have a mezuzah, at least on the door, the outer door. And once you put it up, it becomes like wallpaper. Like I think most people don't notice it. Maybe it's different for you, but I would say most people don't. So what I'm suggesting is that when you get up in the morning and you're about to go out, make the transition from home to the outside world. From home has its own feeling, and the outside world is not scary, but there's opportunities and challenges in the outside world, and it's also a moment of transition. So take a moment by the doorpost, whether you kiss the mezuzah, a traditional thing, or you just think about it and say, like, I want to take an intention with me for this day. Right, so it could. I say like, sometimes like I live in Manhattan. There's like very few trees and nature and so. So my intention is like I want to try and see nature in the canyons of Manhattan, or it could be I have this difficult. I think a meeting that's going to be difficult this afternoon. So I want to carry with me an extra measure of patience, hoping that I will be better at the meeting, in that meeting, and maybe the meeting will be better. And so it's a simple practice. It's just remember in the morning to take your cell phone, to take your keys, and to take a spiritual intention, right? And some days it won't mean anything, and you'll forget it or whatever, but some days it'll make a difference. And I think it's a perfect example of radical traditionalism, because I think the mezuzah is actually supposed to be about that, paying attention. But I think its purpose has gotten lost, and it's become, for the people, I mean, you've probably seen people who are like walking in their house and every door, like it feels kind of rote to me, but I don't know. So that's a larger piece. That's just a small example of taking something and reinterpreting and reconstructing it. Did I answer all that question?
Yeah. So you set out to write a book with 10 core principles, because, what rabbi wouldn't want to write a book organized around the number 10, especially a book that's, redefining, and it brings to resonance the 10 Commandments and so forth. And somewhere along the way, you realize that there's an 11th principle. And so this book has 11 core principles with the practices attached to it. But I want to ask you about the 11th principle, because I was quite intrigued. So the 11th principle is called living in an open society. And in some ways, it's the principle that interacts with all of the other 10 principles, and in some ways maybe sets the condition for both the challenges and opportunities of actualizing the other 10 principles in our lives. And you note that the feature of this contemporary American Jewish existence is that we live in a world in which the embrace of who we are, maybe this feels a little bit different in the last 6 months, but the embrace of who we are is as wide as it's ever been. And we are, as Jews, more fully accepted into this society than we have been historically, and that comes with all sorts of opportunities and also challenges to maintaining a particularistic Jewish identity. What do you see as the particular challenges of the openness of the society that we live in? And how do you, this is something I struggle with, you see it not as a deficit, but actually as an incredible challenge. You see it not just from the lens of, oh gosh, the openness of this embrace is going to assimilate our Jewish identities down to nothing. You see it as a tremendous opportunity for what Judaism could be in the 21st century. So how do you see the collision of open society with this particular Jewish identity?
Yeah. So I like to say that I like to say that some of the genius of rabbinic Judaism was that it created a Judaism after the destruction of the temple, etc., that was completely portable. That Jews could take that Judaism wherever the winds of misfortune would carry them in the next couple of centuries. I think we now need a different Judaism for a number of different reasons, but because we live, and they certainly didn't, all the years of rabbinic Judaism, up to the modern times, they didn't live in an open society, right? But now we do, and and you're right. Sometimes recently it felt, wait, what's going on? But I think, it's good that Judaism could still be portable, but I believe we need a Judaism that's permeable, that's really open to the world around us. Because with all the challenges, and it would be naive to not think that there aren't challenges, we want to live in that world. We don't want to live in the world of the ghetto, of restrictions. And it's both. It's true. There are challenges. There's danger we could just assimilate and disappear. And there's a different model of ultra-Orthodox, which is to completely, in some ways, they understand the danger of the open society, and they say, we're not having televisions. We're not going to have any access to that culture because we know how they would say how corrosive that could be. But that's not at all who we are, right? And it's not just, okay, this is the reality, let's live with it. But, I would say the vast majority of liberal Jewish families today have in their extended family someone who is not Jewish, right? And it could be someone converted, but the rest of the family didn't, right? The parents didn't convert, the brother didn't convert, or the cousin, whatever it is. It's just, and that's the world. So broadly, I think we have to believe that having a 3,000-year-old wisdom tradition, which makes it among the oldest in the world, it has real value. And we want to share that particularly with the people who, and to one degree or another, in different degrees, have decided to join in our lives. And I think that's, and again, think about the context, right? America in the last 100 years has become more inclusive, right? Women got the right to vote. Segregation was ended. Marriage equality is the law of the land. We're in a period now that things are challenged, et cetera, but I think it's clear to us that there's only one way we want to go. We want to be more inclusive. We want to make things more accessible. So to say, well, okay, we want to draw. We believe that, except when it comes to marriage, it doesn't. It's a losing argument, but I'm not making it because it's just a bad argument, right? I think it's because we actually believe that we want to be part of the world. One of the things and it's a challenge. It's a challenge to, in some ways, particularism is under attack these days. and there's a universal feeling, let's all be, and I think one of the things Judaism says is everybody is particular and everybody is universal, right? And you have to hold those two things. So for the first 11 chapters of the Torah, there are no Jews. So clearly, Jews aren't essential for the existence of the world, right? I think it's like an important lesson. Why didn't it start with Abraham, right? Because there is this larger context. But we also don't want to give up all the rest of the Torah and all the conversations and the discussions that follow. And I think it's both a fundamental truth that everybody is particular and everybody is universal, but I think it's one of the truths and one of the teachings we want to convey to people. And this world needs it particularly. This moment needs it particularly.
All right, I think we want to take time for maybe one or two questions. We'll clap at the end heartily. I mean, you can clap now also, it's fine. But let's just see a couple hands if folks want to ask questions of Rabbi Strassfeld. We have a microphone coming around.
Thank you. I visited your synagogue on Upper West Side and got the book and taught and shared your wisdom with my family here. So it's very instrumental. My question is that bugs me these days. We do not have any mechanisms of self-preservation other than isolating ourselves in distinct communities that are tribal. And just your comments opening up to the world is nice. We don't convert people, and our numbers are shrinking. The people who study Torah perhaps also shrink. So, and we have something very treacherous to keep and make grow. Your thoughts about it?
Yeah, look. I think that I think that's the challenge, right? I wish like I had some magic answer, right? And there's a lot of good questions. People ask, well, okay, that sounds very nice about inner qualities, et cetera, but like you can do that stuff and you can be involved in social justice, you can be saving the planet and be Christian, be, Muslim, be, a humanist, why be Jewish, right? And the answer is, there is no answer. That is, it's not because fundamentally I'm a pluralist. I don't think that Judaism has the truth and everybody else doesn't have it, right? There's lots of paths to an ethical society. There's lots of paths to be, you talked about tzav and tzavta, right? So that Hasidism, that you were alluding to that, is understanding the mitzvot. The commandments are all about connection. For Hasidism was connecting to God, but I want to read it, as it's being connected to other people, being connected to the people who are suffering, far away, but I still feel connected to them. Sharon talks in her book about withness, feeling together with other people, right? And connected to yourself, rather than being, we're all self-delusional, okay, but like trying to be, trying, and right, and we're all imperfect, but that doesn't mean we stop what we're trying to do, right? And well, look, I don't know if this is exactly your question, but I think the other peace not only is the particular universal, but this notion of well, I have my way, you have your way, and let's figure out how we can live together. So in the God chapter, there's 11 core principles, and I have I don't know if you want to. I'm going to save some of these, but you can people can take them. This lists the 11 core principles. So God is wrestling with God is one principle. It's not enough for everybody, but if you're together with someone, just take one. And don't read them now. That's always a mistake to hand out something when you're talking. Don't read anything. So one of the things I wanted to figure out was idolatry. Does idolatry have any meaning today? So some people say, well, it's worshiping money, worshiping fame. Okay, that's not bad. It struck me that what idolatry is about is having a deeply incorrect notion of God. Meaning, I know what God wants. This is the truth. That's the people over there who says something different. That's not what God wants, right? God wants only this. To use the Jewish language, this is Torah true Judaism, and all the other Judaism is not Torah true. And we know, and you don't. And I think that's a form of idolatry. I think that what the golden calf was about was taking something that was liquid and molten and saying, okay, it's going to be a calf. This, Elo Elacha Yisrael, this and only this is the God of Israel. And when Moses asked God at the burning bush, and said, well, who should I tell? What's your name so I could tell the people I'm supposed to convince, right? So you all probably know this. God answers, yeah, sure, yeah. Not clear what that means, but it's probably something like, I am what I am, I will be what I will be, right? God cannot be captured. God cannot be fully known. It's a mistake to say, I know what God wants. God wants me to sacrifice my son at the IKAR, right? I don't think that's what God wants, right? So it's having some humility and a commitment to that sense of that there are multiple ways to go. And that's the world. So I think, just from a self-protection, but that's not why I'm saying it, we want to be in that world, right? Where Elu ve'elu, both these and those are the words of the living God. And I think that phrase is really interesting. What Elohim Chayim, living God. It's like, what? There's the dead God? Like, that was in the 60s also, right? So it's just this notion of don't think you can know it all, right? And it's really in that level accepting kind of imperfection. Go ahead.
I would like to address number 12. After
12?
after COVID and after October 7th, and responding to Jews and the Jewish community.
Yeah, right. Well, in some ways, what I just said is I think part of the answer, right? It's how to figure out how to talk to people together, right? And I don't, people, when you go around talking these days, they say, well, what do you think about what's happening in Israel? What do you think about anti-Semitism? And, have obviously like some brilliant idea. Otherwise, I would tell everybody. But this wasn't exactly what you're asking, but I think the Jewish community wants to draw the circle as wide as possible as who's in on the issue of Israel, right? We don't want to, there's some in the community that are trying to draw the line as narrow as possible. They want to say, J Street, they're out. Jewish Voices for Peace, they're out. This one, they're out. This person said this, they're out, right? Angela Buchdahl said something about Israel we don't like, she should be out. And I think that's, it's not only self-destructive, it just doesn't feel right. Now, there's always some line, right? Usually it's like, well, what about Jews for Jesus, the people used to say, or what about neo-Nazis, right? Well, okay, but if you start from the impulse of let's make the circle as wide as possible, and let's try and talk to those people, even though I think talking to people about Israel has become incredibly more difficult because we are more divided. The gap between this side and that side is wider than it was, a couple of years ago. But one of the core principles is every person is created in the image of God, right? And in the Hasidic teaching, I didn't get to talk about Hasidism. We'll have to get together another time. There's a spark of the divine in each person, and at least the Sfat Emet, 19th century Hasidic master says it can't be extinguished. It's always there, no matter what you do. It's a very powerfully optimistic sense, right? But it's challenging, it's challenging. And leave aside the extremes, right? But it's challenging because the annoying person that's sitting next to you, right? It's like, not because they're terrible, they're just like, oh my God, I'm about to get stuck sitting next to them. So, that's what I think is, this is a hard time. And I think it's also to, it's really to stay committed to the key principles. We didn't get to. I'll finish with this. So the Sfat Emet I just mentioned, there's a text that's central to the book that precedes the 11 core principles, and he asked the question: what's the essence of Torah? What's the essence of Judaism? And I do this, ask people, well, what do you think it is? But we won't do that tonight. And his answer is, you could think about what you think, but I'm pretty sure none of you will answer what he said. He says the Torah is freedom. It's about freedom, not obligation, not law. And he says, and the 613 commandments are really 613 pieces of advice about how to achieve a life of freedom. And what he means by that is, I think, what are the things, as I kind of said earlier, what are the things that get in the way of you being who you could possibly be, right? And this, so it's all about being aware of that and moving for yourself, and moving for the people in your life, and moving for your society to be a place of freedom. And I think that's an extraordinary vision for Judaism and for us.
Amen. Well, a huge thank you to you, Rabbi Strassfeld, for coming, for sharing your Torah, for fighting through the voice. We heard you and we hear you clearly. You can see Jeff already wants you to work on the second edition of the book, which is why he's asking about the 12th principle. I want to close, as we normally do in these Lunch and Learns, just by offering you a brief blessing, which is to really offer you some of your own words that you've quoted in your book back to you. You have a wonderful teaching that you quote from the Degel Machane Ephraim, in which you share in his words that teachers of every generation must respond to the needs of that generation. And so, in a sense, each generation's Torah is necessarily different from the generation that came before it. So to you, Rabbi Strassfeld, I want to thank you for authoring two of those Torahs. Right? The Torah that the generation of the 70s needed in the catalog, and the Torah that our generation needs in this book. And may you go from strength to strength and continue to shape the Torah that we all strive to live by. Shkoch.
Announce about the book.
So friends, obviously, if it wasn't clear, I encourage you to get your hands on this book. The cards that we passed around have some information about how to look it up and how to get it, and encourage you to go to your bookstore, those old bookstores that Rabbi Strassel was talking about, and pick up a copy or order one online.